Manic Digital.
Hello and welcome to Feels Like Therapy, the mini-series I have on this podcast that talks about things therapy related without actually having to pay for a session. I would take that lightly, actually. I would definitely recommend going to therapy if that is something that you can afford. Anyway, today's episode is the second installment. So I thought, let's talk. This actually came to me a few days ago, actually. And it's such an interesting point that I feel like is such a big part of the personality of everyone. Obviously, you've heard, you know what it's going to be about. Today is the overthinking episode. I'm going to get into a bunch of things about overthinking. I feel like overthinking is such a big part of people's personalities and people in general. I mean, I know a lot of people personally that overthink everything. I am an insane overthinker. I will overthink tasks that are super easy, but for some reason it takes a while for me to process things and be like, okay, how am I going to do this? When it's like, hey, okay, you actually need to just do it. And not think too much. I do like to think over processes, but when it comes to overthinking things, I get a bit caught in my head. And overanalyze things. And overanalyzation is a really big part of this as well. Because I feel like overanalyzing things can also lead to overthinking. I don't know what it is about overthinking things that just has that sort of effect on people that can just slow them down. I don't know what it is about it. So I went ahead and collected some dot points and collected some different misconceptions and that about it. So let's get into it. Okay, we're going to start off with some misconceptions. So one misconception is that overthinking just means you think a lot. The issue is actually more about when it comes to thinking repetitively, especially when you're like going over the same information, like, oh, should I do this? Or like, how am I going to do this step? So it's kind of like, how am I meant to do that? And then kind of spend like 5 or 10 minutes trying to think of a process when it is super easy, but it's always repetitive of like, how do I do this? So no, it's more so when thinking becomes repetitive and unproductive, that is when you start overthinking. Okay, second misconception is overthinking means you're indecisive. It's not always. Sometimes overthinking actually comes from wanting to make the perfect decision. You might be extremely decisive about small things, but become paralyzed when the decision feels important. This is like, well, if I do this, I'm gonna, your brain freezes and is like, stop, you shouldn't be doing this. I think that's also a big deal when people are like afraid of heights, and it's just like that becomes a big circle of like, what do you do then? I know I've definitely experienced a lot of that, but this isn't all about me this episode, so I'm gonna move along. So the underlying thought can be, if I make the wrong choice, everything could go wrong. And that is a big concept, a big part, definitely a big part of overthinking, because you're always thinking about, oh, what happens if I do this and this and then something else happens. So if you really need to, you can take the break. But yeah, overthinking definitely doesn't mean that you're indecisive. It just means that you're putting a bit too much effort into a simple task. Overthinking means you're anxious. This is an important distinction. Overthinking can occur alongside anxiety, but having an occasional overthinking spiral doesn't automatically mean someone. Overthinking can occur alongside anxiety, but having the occasional overthinking spiral doesn't automatically mean someone has an anxiety disorder. It's like having an overthinking moment doesn't mean you need a diagnosis for anxiety. I've I know quite a few people that have felt that way before, but yeah, sometimes it says here sometimes your brain is just incredibly annoying. And you know what? Yeah. Um your your brain is like one of the big problems with this, but it's trying to figure out a strategy on how to figure out how to get on the right path without leading yourself to an option that you think is bad, but it might just take like a bit longer. So yeah, you don't need, if you're feeling anxious, you do if you feel like your brain is causing you a lot of stress, definitely take an anxiety, get a diagnosis for anxiety, but it doesn't always lead to overthinking. So there's another misconception. Okay, overthinking is always negative. Not necessarily. You can overthink positive things too. Like, what if this goes amazingly? What if they like me? What if this opportunity changes my life? I think a common factor here is like a mental loop of like, well, what if this happens, and like, what if they don't like me? What if, I've joined a friend group and they don't like me? Um, it's always like a spiral of like, what do you do in this situation? But it doesn't necessarily mean it can be good at a positive or negative. It can just, it's just your brain going into fight or flight mode, really. I don't know if that makes sense. I probably don't. Okay, another misconception is overthinking is a personality trait. This is a useful distinction because people often say I'm just an overthinker. That's who I am. But you don't have to necessarily turn a behavior into an identity. You can say I tend to overthink rather than I am an overthinker. That that's a subtle change to the that changes the conversation from this is who I am to this is something my brain sometimes does. Okay, here's a big misconception. Okay, here's a big misconception. The goal is never to overthink again. This is kind of where I want to lead into the next bit of this podcast. It's definitely, although it's like pretty possible to think about that and be like, oh well, that seems easy enough. It's actually impossible. Everyone gets stuck in their head sometimes. The goal isn't not never worry, never replay a conversation, or never have irrational thoughts. It's more notice when you're looping, separate from the facts of assumptions, decide whether there's actually something you can do, accept uncertainty when you can't control the outcome, and move your attention somewhere else. And this brings me back to this point of this episode, whereas Maybe I don't need to figure everything out. And with that, I'm going to move over to my next set of notes. Okay. So here are some tips about worrying and overthinking things that you can use. Here are some in the moment. Name what's happening. So say I'm having a worry thought or my mind is predicting the worst. This creates some distance between you and the thought instead of treating it as a fact. You can slow down your breathing. So breathe in gently for about 4 seconds, and you can slow your breathing. So breathe in gently for about 4 seconds and out for 6 seconds, repeating for 1 or 2 minutes. Focus on the feeling of breathing rather than arguing with every thought. Breathing and mindfulness are commonly recommended for reducing rumination. So there you go. Use the control question. Ask, is there anything I can do about this right now? If yes, choose one small step. If no, remind yourself, this matters to me, but not worrying won't solve it right now. One of the last tips that you can do in the moment is ground yourself in the present. Notice 5 things you see, 4 things you feel, 3 things you hear, and 2 things you smell, and 1 thing you taste. This helps shift attention from imagined possibilities to your immediate surroundings. And here are some of the things that you can manage reoccurring worries. And here are some of the things you can do when managing reoccurring worries. Schedule a worry period. Set aside about 15 to 30 minutes after consistent time. Set aside about 15 to 20 minutes at a consistent time to write down your worries and consider solutions. When worries arise earlier, write a brief note and tell yourself, I'll return to this during my worry time. This postponement method is recommended by several mental health sources. You can also turn what ifs into if then. Instead of what if I fail, try if I make a mistake, then ask for feedback and correct what I can. Try if I make a mistake, then I'll ask for feedback, then correct what I can. A concrete plan gives your mind something useful to do. You can write thoughts down onto a page, or you can write down thoughts. Divide a page into what I'm worried about, what I can control, one action I can take, what I need to accept or leave for later. Check the evidence. Ask yourself what I need to accept or leave later. Last point is you can check the evidence. Ask yourself what facts support this fear, what facts do not. What am I assuming? Am I assuming I know what others think? What would I say to a friend in the same situation? Here are some facts to reduce the cycle. Move your body. Even for a short walk or stretching sessions, physical activity can help interrupted rumination. You can limit repeated checking, reassuring seeking and excessive news or social media exposure, which can keep the worry loop active. And finally, here's a quick routine. When you notice yourself spiraling, pause and take 5 slow breaths. Label the thought, this is a worry, not certainly. Ask whether you can act on it now. Write down one next step or schedule it for a worry time. return your attention to one sensory detail or practical task. So that basically wraps up this episode of Feels Like Therapy. I hope we all learned something today. I know I certainly did. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Feels Like Therapy, and I will see you guys in 2 weeks. Bye, guys.
This podcast is a Manic Digital production.